we're opening up episode 18 of The Bride of Monster Kid Radio with the song Rock Pose. It's from the album Work, Work, Work from the band The Ghosttones. You can find them over at the Ghosttones and then the number 1.bandcamp.com. Check it out when you're done listening to the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. This is The Bride of Monster Kid Radio. I am your writer, host, and producer, Derek M. Cook, and you are a podcast listener with discerning taste. I know I've made that joke before, but I mean it every single time because you are, well, the reason we do this show. So thank you for listening, thanks for being here, and thanks for checking out this episode where we're going to be sitting down with an old friend of mine, somebody who used to be on Monster Kid Radio back in the day. His name is Alan Tromp. Now, it has been a long time since I've chatted with him for a podcast, but when I saw him talking on Facebook about how much he was enjoying the movie Curse of the Faceless Man, I jumped, because I also really enjoy this movie, and I wanted to talk about this movie on this podcast for a very long time, and just never really had the opportunity, never really made it happen. Well, you know what? This time around, we made it happen. So Alan and I are going to get together. We're going to talk about the movie Curse of the Faceless Man. And because this is an episode of Bride of Monster Kid Radio, we end up talking about other things too. Other things that are still Monster Kid Radio adjacent. Okay, we talk about Star Trek a little bit, but we do talk mostly about Curse of the Faceless Man. Also, we've got Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review where he is still going through Ultraman Ace episode by episode. You know what? I think the only thing better than Mark Matzke's Beta Capsule review of the Ultraman Ace and pretty much every Ultraman series is just sitting down and watching the Ultraman series for yourself. So check out Ultraman when you're done listening to Mark tell you what's going on in this episode, in this installment of his Beta Capsule review. Also, I'm going to mention this again at the end of the show, but consider this a call to action. We talked a little bit about this earlier this year on the podcast. There was an article published over at Yahoo Entertainment called Ranking the Classic Universal Monster Movies from Best to Worst, written by Joe George. And he went through and he picked out his top 25, I guess, best or favorite or most important. I'm not quite sure what his criteria was, but the top 25 Universal Monster movies. He included some things that I found a little interesting. I don't want to say questionable because taste is subjective, but we here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio want to make the objective list of the best Universal Monster movies. So I want you to go over to tinyurl.com/TOPTENUNI. That's tinyurl.com/top10UNI. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes as well as over on our Patreon page. This is going to take you to a Google form where I've listed pretty much every Universal Monster movie from the classic era, starting with a couple of silent films and going all the way up to 1960. And I want you to help us determine what the master list is that we're going to use here on Bride of Monster Kid Radio when we talk about the best of the classic Universal Monster movies. Pick 10 movies. Your criteria is totally up to you. You decide what you consider the best is. Are they the most entertaining, the most important? Do they have historical significance? Are they special because they were the first one you watched when it comes to Universal Monster movies? It's up to you. But make sure you go to tinyurl.com/top10UNI and get this filled out in a week because I want to talk about this next week on the show. You've got until next Sunday, March 30th, 12 o'clock noon Mountain Time to fill this out. And feel free to spread this around. If there are monster kids out there that aren't listening to the podcast, well, obviously we want them to listen to the podcast, but go ahead and share this with them as well. I made sure that I posted it in a couple of other podcast Facebook groups. I'm going to mention it over at the Classic Horror Film Board, and I'd really like to see if we can get as many people involved in creating our master list here, and we'll go over it next week. Again, I'll mention this at the end of the show, but I'm just giving you a heads up now. This is the call to action to end all calls to action. Really want your help to help us come up with what we are going to start using as the definitive list here at Bride of Monster Kid Radio. That's for next week's episode. We still have this week's episode to get to, so why don't we go ahead and get into that right now.
coldest and darkest regions of the sea, as old as time itself, comes the most terrifying monster the world has ever seen. The Sea Creature! Slithering over the face of the earth came a monster from beyond the stars. Inhuman, indestructible. Life on this planet was doomed when it conquered the world! These will be the strangest, most terrifying motion pictures you have ever seen. You will see monsters from a nightmare. The most horrifying creatures that ever made you wake up screaming. The She Creature! And it conquered the world!
At the edge of the universe, 400 men and women are probing the immeasurable blackness of space. Their leaders are an Earthman with no fear and a stranger with no heart. Travel beyond our time and solar system, into new galaxies, into worlds beyond your dreams. Star Trek, every week, in color on the NBC television network.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 32, with Hopes in the Star of Ultra. Tak engages in an aerial battle with a UFO, during which Hokuto hears a noise that disorients him, and he almost crash lands. The experience leaves him shaken, yet he resolves to improve his pilot skills. Meanwhile, Dan Umezu, nicknamed the Sixth Ultra Brother, saves a boy about his age from getting hit by a truck. The boy, who goes by the name Akira Hoshino, is sick with a fever, so Dan takes him home where he and his sister can tend to him. Dan drops by Hokuto's apartment asking for medical advice and takes Hokuto to meet Akira, but when he does, Hokuto experiences the same queasy feeling he had during the UFO encounter. The next day, while Hokuto undergoes flight training, Akira reveals himself to Dan to be terrible monster human Coax. Unfortunately, no one except Hokuto believes Dan, leaving Tak headquarters vulnerable to a sneak attack by Coax in full terrible monster form. What chance does Ultraman Ace have if Coax can scramble his perception as well? With Hopes in the Star of Ultra, the 32nd episode of Ace, broadcast for the first time on November 10th, 1972, continues to build on the relationship between Hokuto and Dan, a charismatic combination that serves the series well. In what's becoming a bit of a pattern for Ultraman Ace, very little explanation is offered as to why things happen as they do. But episode 32 makes up for it with plenty of explosive action and the effectively creepy character of Akira Hoshino, who functions as an evil foil to honorary 6th Ultra Brother Dan Umezu. As a terrible monster, Coax is neither laughable nor particularly striking, although the manner by which Ace dispatches him is, shall we say, disarming. Hokuto continues to be a very mild anti-hero, probably too likable for such a label, but consistently messing up, facing discipline, then defying that discipline in order to save the day. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Out of the darkness of the ancient past, out of the dust of centuries and the inscrutable silence of the unknown, come two new adventures in shock and suspense on one sensational motion picture program. The Mummy, plus Curse of the Undead.
Fear will freeze you when you face the Mummy.
It tears steel bars like paper.
It snaps men's spines like matchsticks.
It walks through bullets like a ghost. Wakened from the darkest tomb of the pharaohs, it stalks the earth with strangely human desires.
The Mummy.
And on the same program, Curse of the Undead.
The haunting story of a faceless fiend who drained the young and beautiful of life.
Together on one program, Curse of the Undead, and in chilling Technicolor,
The Mummy.
Have something to share with Bride of Monster Kid Radio? You can email the show at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call and leave a voicemail at 360-524-2484.
Let ye who seek to disturb the eternal peace and sleep of the Royal One, beware.
It came from the dead, terrorizing the world with a mystic power centuries old. It feeds on blood. It kills for a cat goddess, the seductive embodiment of an avenging ancient evil. Pharaoh's Curse.
You, Faraday. You're a doctor?
You can fight known things, but I don't know how to fight the unknown.
I think it's a room. Throw me a torch.
I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome to the podcast devoted to the classic, and sometimes not so classic, genre cinema of yesteryear. And I offer you this warning. Sometimes Derek and his guests get excited, and they may spoil a movie or two. You know how excited monster kids can get sometimes. If Monster Kid Radio spoils a movie for you, do not come whining to me. I cannot stand whines.
Long before he was hanging out with the Bionic Woman and the $6 Million Man, Richard Anderson was facing off against let's call him a mummy, a faceless man, so to speak, in the 1958 film Curse of the Faceless Man, which is a movie that I have a lot of fondness for, and so does apparently this week's return guest. It's been a long time since I've had Alan Tromp on the show, but I'm excited to welcome him back. Alan, welcome back to the podcast.
Eric, sure, I'm glad to be here and talking about one of my favorite old-timey B movies.
Oh, that's great. It's great. It has been way too long since I've had you on. What's new in the world of Alan Tromp?
Some things that I've been doing lately is I got to do a couple presentations at the latest Necronomicon Providence on wacky stuff like forbidden books in movies, like not only the Necronomicon, but there's the book that in Trilogy of Terror that Karen Black takes down, and it's like voodoo curses and stuff. So we went through all of those sorts of things, and some of the books from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and things like that. So that was a lot of fun. And I've been doing some writing over in the UK for articles for We Belong Dead magazine and publications. So I'm getting to write some fun articles for them.
We Belong Dead's a great publication, and that's awesome that you're involved with writing for them. I would love to sit in on any of your presentations. It's been forever since I sat in on one at the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival and CthulhuCon in Portland, so many moons ago. We've got to see if we can get somebody in the room with you and record these things, because they're just fun.
I appreciate that. Supposedly they did record some of the last panels and things I was on, so I'll keep poking at them and see if I can find out a little more about that.
That'd be fantastic. The idea of forbidden books and forbidden knowledge is something that I'm just drawn to. And I know it's a Lovecraftian thing, but it's not strictly Lovecraft. Like you said, Buffy the Vampire Slayer even tapped into that. You know, the series Supernatural tapped into that. You see it in comic books. You see it in other movies, TV shows. And I don't know if they call it forbidden knowledge, but there's even a spooky book in this movie that we're going to talk a little bit about. We don't spend a lot of time with it, but
okay.
there's a book of Black Egyptian magic, I think they call it.
All right. Okay.
So I just love the idea of forbidden knowledge being written down by somebody crazy enough to think that it needs to be preserved.
And it was interesting because when I went up there, I went in saying, I am not a scholar of actual occult lore, because I had people saying to me things, and I knew this was going to happen. People were saying things like, well, do you think that they really have found the third key of Solomon, and the Grand Grimoire? Like, I just watch the movies and read the books, and I've heard of some of these things, but but it was a lot of fun. People brought up things to me that I hadn't thought of. There's a movie with Roman Polanski did. It's all about a forbidden grimoire.
Yeah.
People bring up all sorts of things for these topics.
I just love that idea of forbidden lore.
You've done some independent writing of your own, Derek. That's one of the joys, I think, of the Lovecraft Circle, was people creating their own grimoires. Have you ever built, something like everything you always wanted to know about Eldritch horrors, but were afraid to ask?
I have toyed with the idea of having my Monster Hunter character in one of his stories, the Mark Temple stories, stumble across a book that has some forbidden lore in it. I haven't quite developed exactly where the story would go. In the end, he would probably just want to see the book burned so it doesn't cause any damage to anybody. But the idea of having a magic book, I've toyed with the idea. All right. I even have a name for it, and who supposedly wrote the book. And of course, the traditional inked in human blood, bound in human flesh, all of that stuff.
Well, you've got the CV ready all to go for it. You've got everything set to go. Yeah.
Volcanic fury of Vesuvius. From the ravaged city of Pompeii, across 2,000 years, comes one of the strangest mysteries of all time. The curse of the Faceless Man.
You posted on Facebook a little bit ago about Curse of the Faceless Man. And I thought, I've been trying to come up with a reason to have you back on the show anyway. I haven't talked about this show or this movie at all on the show. Figured let's see if Alan's up for it, and you jumped at it, and I appreciate that. And you said at the top of this is one of your favorite B movies. I'm curious, when was the first time you saw it?
Okay, let's see. Late 60s, early 70s on one of the St. Louis local creature features.
Will that be the best way to see it?
And the best way would be in the theater or the drive-in, but it, I think I can even remember back when, and this might be even a little before your time, but going through all the movie listings and seeing, what's going to be and what's on at 3 a.m. and things like that. And they had this movie called Curse of the Faceless Man. And it really intrigued me, that title. So our local independent channel showed not just Universals, but, we got a smattering of all sorts of AIP and little independent horror. So, and this was one of the ones they ran.
I love that. I would love to stumble across this. We don't really even have that experience anymore, right? We have like Roku channels and YouTube. We don't have that flipping through the dial, turning the knob, moving the rabbit ears to try to find that station that might be showing something. But I bet it would be a lot of fun to see Curse of the Faceless Man in that setting. But like you said, seeing it in the theater would be even better. Or a drive-in. Wow. That would be perfect.
I do actually have a movie poster for this. They double billed it with this and It, the Terror from Beyond Space. So you would have had two very good movies to work with, both written by Twilight Zone contributor Jerome Bixby.
Right, and both directed by Edward Cahn.
Okay. Oh, okay. I did not know that. So
he directed both of them. They're both written by the same guy. You say Twilight Zone contributor. I know Jerome Bixby's name from some Star Trek work that he did. So yeah, he's a genre mainstay, and they pumped these things out. How long did they take shooting Curse of the Faceless Man? Like a week, if that?
I mean, it couldn't take too long because basically the whole plot takes place. They have a few exterior shots. They have shots down an alleyway. They have shots in a museum and an artist studio and some oceanside stuff, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's pretty short and sweet, and it doesn't overstay its welcome either. It's not that long. It's barely over an hour, which I think is perfect for a movie like this. I feel like maybe they could have expanded it a little bit, but then you'd lose the narration, and I really like the narration.
Yeah.
You know, the narration kind of gives it a more timeless kind of story. I know it's a story, but there's a storyteller vibe that comes with the narration that I really respond to.
And it's interesting you mentioned the narration because Vic Perrin was the guy who did the narration, and he's the guy who did the Outer Limits, the original Outer Limits narration, where he said, it said, "We have taken control of your TV set. We will adjust the horizontal. We will adjust the vertical," and all that.
Yeah, this movie's actually got some interesting connections or cred because you've got Edward Cahn, who's directed this, The Terror from Beyond Space. I think he do Creature with the Atom Brain as well, which is another one that I really like.
I think he did all sorts of stuff. I think he did Invasion of the Saucer Men. I think he might have done The She Creature.
Zombies of Maratao, some really good stuff. And then you've got the monster itself, the Faceless Man itself, designed by Charles Gamora, one of the original ape men.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. I mean, he didn't wear the suit. They wanted somebody a little bit bigger. But Gamora, who is known for being one of the original gorilla guys of Hollywood, or one of the most well-known. I mean, how cool is that?
That's really incredible. One other person is in here that folks might recognize is a fella named Dr. Emmanuel, who is this white-haired archaeologist guy who speaks with this really European accent and everything. And I finally figured out where I know him from. He was one of the scientists that is in Frankenstein's Daughter.
Yep, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I was wondering myself. I didn't bother to look him up, but you're absolutely right. And that's another one that I actually really like. I love these 50s monsters movies, man. These are so fun.
And and his health is a lot better in this one, because if you've seen Frankenstein's Daughter, he's always about to have a heart attack and, get me the Digeneral, get me the Digen. And this one, he's up at and he's taking young ladies and forcing them to relive memories that, psychiatrically these days, probably not too healthy to do this sort of thing, but yeah.
No. And it all happens kind of off camera, but he puts the one character into this regression therapy, and nobody seems to bat an eye. There's one little moment where Richard Johnson's character is, well, did she give you permission? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
They did do that.
And that's about it. No, he's really good. Felix Lochet is his name, and he appeared in Frankenstein's Daughter, like you said. Looks like he also did an episode of Star Trek, but then a lot of the people that were in the 50s monster movies did an episode of Trek.
I think he was one of the guys that shows up when they went on and they had several episodes where they go to a planet and they all catch the aging disease.
Okay.
I think he's one of the last colonists that's still alive when the Enterprise crew gets there. So I believe that's him. Yep.
So I talked about this being a kind of sort of mummy movie. Would you consider it a mummy movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything I've read about it said, and it's got all of those aspects of it where you've got the stiff-legged creature, stalking the woman and picking her up and carrying her to, their little romantic hideaway or something. And yeah, very much like that sort of thing. Of course, he doesn't have any dialogue. The menace is he's just kind of so alien looking, and but yeah, he's completely covered with the lava stone from Vesuvius. So yeah, I would say that's very fair.
I agree. And when I first saw this movie, it's because I was on a mummy kick. I've always loved a good mummy movie. I don't know if it's because I also have a very non-monster kid radio friendly love for certain slasher movies from the 80s. Okay. But I've always viewed mummy movies as kind of like proto-slashers. They are kind of cut from the same cloth. Usually they exist to punish somebody for doing something they shouldn't have done, much like a lot of the slasher movies that I like from the 80s do.
Yeah.
So I was on a mummy kick, and after you get through the Universal mummy movies, where do you go? Well, you can go to Hammer, but after that, where do you go to get a classic mummy movie? And this one turned up on a list somewhere, and I checked it out. And at first I was a little confused because I'm thinking, mummy movie, where's the wrappings? But then as you get into it, you realize, well, there are other ways to mummify somebody, and getting stuck in the resulting Vesuvius eruption, that'll mummify somebody real quick.
They even mention that. He says, well, this isn't like the Egyptian mummies we have over in the, in the film. So,
yeah. So I really ended up enjoying this one quite a bit. And I would even go as far as saying, and maybe this is sacrilege, don't take away my Monster Kid card, people. But I think I like this one a little bit more than some of the later Universal Mummy movies.
I'd agree with that.
Okay, I'm not alone. Okay.
I'll give you a character reference.
Okay. And I love those movies, don't get me wrong. Karras is my guy, but, this one, it's a little different, and I really appreciate that. There's a lot of things that make it different, not just the design of the mummy, although the mummy's pretty cool. It's quite a striking image. He was played by Bob Bryant, who I believe was a stunt performer, which would make sense. He's built like one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got quite the look, the monster itself. Quintelis is the name of the mummy, or the Faceless Man. And he's literally faceless. He is just a stone figure. There are many times in the movie where he may as well just be a statue. Mm-hmm. Given the way he just stands still and the texture and everything else. But when he starts moving, it's pretty horrifying. And the filmmakers didn't hold back. You see, it's a black and white movie, so it's in black or dark brown or gray, but he bloodies some people up.
Yeah.
And I'm not used to seeing that in some of these movies sometimes. So that was, I'm not going to say that, oh, blood, yay, but it was just different. You know what? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was surprised by that. You see he gets his fists, a little bit crimson at times when he goes after people. If I can explain when I saw this movie, and after 66 years of life, I've come to understand one thing. We all have these little pockets in our brain where we're affected by different things. Some people, it's like snakes, it can be isolation. I dated a girl once. One of the most terrifying things to her was just in watching Vincent Price, Roger Corman, Edgar Allan Poe movies, was just the soundtrack. You hear the voices going, But for me, and this is one of them, the idea of a monster not having a face strikes something deep chord in me of just like freaking me out. Because you bring up Star Trek. Do you remember when in Charlie X took away the crewmate's face?
Yeah.
Yep. Or if people ever catch on like MeTV or anything like that, the early Lost in Spaces had lots of these monsters without faces. Aliens that didn't have mouths. They had one that was just sort of a synthetic life form, didn't have a face, and it could still kind of groan and move without a mouth and things. And so even in some of the post-code comics that I read, when they would take away people's faces, or in the movie Terror from the Year 5000, when the cat lady from outer space peels off the face of the lady, that messes with me.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Of course, Dolls Coming to Life too does that. But
so I'm taking notes here in case I ever want to pull a really good prank on Alan.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you're all set. Achilles heel here. Yep.
That makes sense. And I think if you give something a face,
you could kind of relate to it.
Yeah.
The xenomorph in Alien doesn't have any eyes. It just has that kind of plasticky armor shell over where its eyes would be. It just has the mouth and everything. Mm-hmm. So I think that may be a little touch of it too, to keep you from, getting any kind of empathy for it. So
it takes that recognizability, the humanity away. It makes it more alien. And yeah, I guess that's not something I really thought about with this particular movie. I think about it with movies with aliens and things like that. But I hadn't really considered it with this one, despite the fact that the word faceless is on its title. By removing the face, it becomes something completely unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And our lead actor, our lead guy, Richard Anderson, spends most of the movie, as does the police officers, this isn't real. I mean, look, he's just a statue. He just happened to be there. He's not getting up and moving. I don't believe you. Because how could you? Maybe if it had a face, they would have been a little bit more willing to believe earlier in the film. I don't know.
Yep.
But by removing any kind of recognizability, it instantly makes that threat more inhuman or more mysterious.
Isn't there one creature in the Silent Hill game that also is like, is it the nurse that doesn't have a face?
Maybe.
Yeah. So other people have exploited this too. So,
now I'm starting to feel like this movie might be even a little bit more deep than I originally anticipated. I was talking about some of the things in this movie too that I thought made it stand out. And I don't know if this is necessarily true of the films that came out around the same time, but it was interesting and kind of refreshing for me, for somebody who's been watching a lot of more modern horror movies lately, just because that's what I have access to down here in Arizona these days. The older authority figure, the one who knows things, is the older gentleman, and it's the younger scientist who doesn't believe, as opposed to the other way around, where something like The Blob, the young characters are the ones trying to tell the older people in authority what's going on. It's a subversion, and I really appreciated about this as well. I don't know where the change happened, because, in the later horror movies, the younger characters find out what's going on and nobody believes them. Whether it's one of those slasher movies that I talked about, or even something like Gremlins, where he's calling into the police and trying to tell them the gremlins are running loose and they don't believe him, with the Corey Feldman character. I don't know where that swapped, but I liked that in this too, that there's still this repository of old forbidden knowledge, maybe because they've got those old forbidden books, that is willing to look outside of this science, and I just put in air quotes for those listening, science of the modern day.
I guess part of it is respect for folklore and anthropology and stuff that they have, whereas the later, you cannot take fingerprints off of a petrified person, or you cannot stop a ghost with bullets or something like that.
That's true. We were talking a little bit about the narration earlier. I think the narration does serve the film well. I like the narration in it. I don't know if it's all as accurate as, say, like the science drops that we get in a Jack Arnold film or something like that. I don't know enough about my Pompeii history. Do they have it nailed down to the exact date that Vesuvius blew? Is that something that's really known?
That's beyond me. I don't know. Although I did think it was, at the very beginning of the movie, you do get this great shot of like a model city of Pompeii and a volcano in the background and everything, that I wonder if they made that or if that was borrowed from some other film or something.
I do wonder. There's a few things here. You were talking earlier about like the few locations, but every once in a while they either put in some stock footage or something.
Yep.
To really kind of class it up and make it look like they spent a lot more money on the movie than they really did. I'm curious about the beginning. I would imagine it's MGM. They've got to have a bunch of footage in their vault that they can pull from. But
this movie came out just a little bit before all the Hercules movies and things like that. But they were still doing historical dramas and things. I know they had movies about Pompeii and they had Krakatoa east of Java. I think that came a little later. I wonder if they were trying to exploit that sort of taste for the exotic, or, antiquity, with this one.
I'm not sure, but I think you just stumbled upon another reason why I happen to like this one a little bit more than some of the later Universal movies. Because the Universal Mummy movies aren't exotic. We're in the swamps of wherever in America. We're not over in Egypt where the mummies were. We've brought them back over to the States, and now they're running around in Florida or wherever they happen to be. Whereas this one is definitely set in the exotic. It's in Italy. It's in Rome. I wonder if that's another reason why I have gravitated toward this one quite a bit.
And you even have they even went as far as things like, well, I'm sure they shot this in Southern California or something, but you've got trucks with Italian names on them and buildings with names. And, I'm sure somewhere in there they snuck in like location footage of Naples, where some of it is supposed to be set. So yeah, it is a little bit different than a lot of the standard English moors of horror movies or the 1950s big bug films.
That's true. This came out in 58. So yeah, the big bug movies, the atomic horror movies were already making their way and stomping their way across the screen. There is a touch of radiation talked about in this film about how we used X-rays, and that must have reanimated or reactivated the man within. Nice little or nod, I suppose, to atomic and radiation power.
And that lets them pull out the plot a little bit, because once Quintilis gets away from his Earth that charged him up in the first place, he collapses, and then they have to wait and take him back, and then he has to, be exposed to the radiation of the X-rays to re-energize him again and set him loose on his final rampage.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, everybody's kind of on board. Richard Anderson isn't necessarily disbelieving anymore. And he also wants to make sure his fiance, I believe, I don't think they're married yet, his fiance is safe, who is on her way to being inadvertently drowned by the Faceless Man. And that's where this movie does bear some similarities to the Universal Mummy movies.
Oh, yeah.
There's the love story at the core of it, this forbidden or lost love that, was in a previous life. There's a reincarnation touched on a little bit. This woman is having dreams and visions of Quintilis, and is an artist and is expressing that through her art. And I thought that was an interesting little nod too. You don't necessarily see it is fleshed out, I feel like, in some of the other mummy movies or movies of this time.
No. And one thing is interesting is there's a lot of love triangles in this movie going on. You got Richard Anderson, at one time was involved with the beautiful Italian professor there, but now he's got this new blonde American love. And at the end of the movie, the Italian professor lady is in love with her, the guy who's kind of been her suitor for years. And of course, Quintilis is in love with the blonde because he thinks she's a reincarnation. So really the only people who really lose out in this love story is Quintilis at the end, without going into too much detail. And the, how many, 5 or 6 people who get murdered by the Faceless Man along the way for getting in his way.
Lots of little love triangles happening all over the place here with Tina Enright and
there you go. Thank you.
Dr. Mellon and all of those others. I did play the warning at the very beginning of this for the spoilers, so we can talk about the ending, and I want to talk about the ending. Ultimately, because Quintilis is in love with his lost love, who he thinks is Tina, who may or may not be a reincarnation of her, because we do have that regression hypnosis thing happening. He wants to protect her from what's coming, from Vesuvius blowing. And he takes her to the, what did they call it? The Cove of the Blind Fisherman, which is a great name.
It's a great name. That is a great name.
That's a fantastic name, which was shot at a beach in Portuguese Bend, which is in California, in LA County. But yeah, I love the name of that, the Cove of the Blind Fisherman. It sounds like something in a Dungeons and Dragons module, It's
At one point, the good Dr. Emmanuel, like you say, regresses Tina Enright, and she speaks as this former lost love of Quintilis. And I don't think, what's the expression? I don't think that she was all that into him. She kind of had a little spark there, kind of a Romeo and Juliet. I'm an aristocrat. He's a slave. He's the most powerful gladiator, and that we know of. But how can I return his love? So she's not willing to give up her station and her wealth and things just to pursue blindly this one suitor who's claimed her.
I did find it interesting as well that after being regressed and talking as the former Egyptian aristocrat, she spoke perfect English.
Yeah.
But that's one of those conceits you have with these movies, I suppose.
and they point that out in the Wikipedia entry on the film, is that that Bridie Murphy stuff was that about reincarnation was really popular back then, about where you had Roger Corman's The Undead, where you take the girl back to her former life as a witch in Elizabethan England, or The She Creature, where you take them all the way back to this first incarnation of this monstrous prehistoric beast. So again, jumping on that bandwagon too.
Yeah. He's taking her to the Cove of the Blind Fisherman, basically to put her in the water, take her to the water because the volcano's going to blow up and he wants to protect her. Well, she's not going to be able to survive this. She's unconscious. But when he gets in the water, something really cool starts to happen. And I thought this was a really neat way to dispatch of our villain. And maybe dispatch isn't quite the right word because nobody really does it to him. He does it to himself. But he wanders into the water and his shell is made up of whatever it is, he got on him when the volcano blew, the lava and everything else. And then the x-ray stuff happened to him. He starts to dissolve. It looks like Alka-Seltzer is bubbling up around him with some cool sound effects to make it seem like it's a bigger deal than it probably was. And he just dissolves in the seawater. And I thought that was a really neat
Maybe
image.
they threw some bricks of dry ice into the water near him or something like that, and that kicked things off.
I'm betting it's got to be something like that, right?
But it is, and I was thinking about this movie. Wouldn't it, Derek, wouldn't it have been cool if, like, at one point, this might be a little extreme for a 1950s movie, if the shell around his face cracked open and you saw his emaciated face and everything like that. That would have been,
wow.
I would have enjoyed that.
That would have been really neat. Don't give anybody any remake ideas, but an image like that would have been even more shocking than the blood on his hands. But yeah, he just kind of wanders off into the ocean and is dissolving as he goes and eventually falls over and dissolves into what we assume is nothingness. No room for a sequel here, folks. And Anderson goes, I keep calling him Anderson. I know that's not who he is in the movie, but his character goes in and saves Tina and Wright from drowning. Movie comes to an end with some more narration.
And one thing now also, one other big point about this is, I don't know about for you, and this affected me when I first watched it a little bit, is it has really good music in it by this guy named Gerald Fried.
Yes.
I think it's his name. And, it has a lot of the music is, if it's around Quintilis and you see, there are all these scenes where, did he just move? Did he move so slowly that you're not quite sure? And they play this sort of unsettling music. But then, of course, once he starts punching people and, killing folks, it's all this bombastic da 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 stuff. And I think this composer did stuff for movies like The Return of Dracula with Francis Lederer and maybe I Bury the Living.
Yeah, I mean, did
things
a lot
like
of
that, which also have really good music.
And he did
scores.
a lot of television as well.
Okay.
And I think I've heard it pronounced Gerald Fried, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that probably.
But
that sounds.
He did Mission Impossible, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Gilligan's Island, and my beloved Star Trek. He did a lot of Star Trek. And he was nominated for an Academy Award in 1974 for a documentary that he did. He also did the music for the miniseries Roots. So we've got some real cred here.
Wow. Okay.
So we've got some real cred here. Fried, however you pronounce it. He is probably, when it comes to the Star Trek music, he's really probably best known for the Vulcan fight music from Amok Time. The da 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 da.
Is that his?
Yeah, that's his.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my.
So that's him. And I love that stuff. I will sit here and listen to those Star Trek soundtracks for days.
Yeah, that's very recognizable.
Yeah.
And that wasn't his, but this is going off on a tangent, but it's funny how much Star Trek brings people together, because do you remember the sort of music with all the little hand castanets and cymbals where they had Captain Pike's chambers with the green slave girl in the menagerie? There's that really recognizable Eastern sort of music. When I was getting chemotherapy for cancer treatment, somebody had that as their ringtone, and they went off, and everybody in the room started talking about Star Trek. And so here we are hooked up to these, putting this poison into us. And, but we shared that. And I thought that was a really nice way to bring people who are going through a tough time together.
I love that so much. I don't love that you were dealing with cancer treatment. I love that you're past that. And I love that Star Trek was part of that in some very minuscule way. I love that idea. For a long time, I had my ringtone on my phone to be the sound of the Star Trek communicator chirping. But I accidentally set it to my text message alerts and every other alert on my phone. And because I have a lot of texts and Facebook messaging and everything else popping up, it was going off like 2-3 times an hour. And it just drove everybody around me nuts. So I had to turn it off. Now I love Star Trek. I need to talk about Star Trek more on this show. I really need to get back into doing Star Trek talks on a regular basis. But yeah, sidetracks, Monster Kid Radio. It happens all the time. I'm not too worried.
Cool.
I'm not too worried at all. In the end, I really like this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. It's a different take on the Mummy movie. It runs, like I said, just barely over an hour. It doesn't overstay its welcome at all. You're in and you're out.
Like you said, it has similarities to the Mummy, but it is very different. You've got, and I think people at that time were also very familiar with the photographs of when they did the excavations of Pompeii. They actually had people who were mummified like this. There were photos. If you've ever heard of the band, you've heard of the band Susie and the Banshees.
Oh yeah.
Their song "Cities in Dust" is about the people who were kind of mummified and turned into statues from the Pompeii explosion, from Vesuvius. So I think that touched. So this Jerome Bixby guy, besides doing, didn't he do Mirror Mirror? Wasn't that his from Star Trek? Didn't he create the whole alternate universe?
I'm not sure, but I think so, actually. Now that, I was pulling up his listing earlier because I wanted to double check something while we were talking, and you're absolutely right. I've got him right here. He did Mirror Mirror. He did the episode of Star Trek with my favorite Klingon, Day of the Dove.
Day of the Dove.
Yeah, with Cahn.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. Yeah. No, he did Mirror Mirror. So,
and of course, he did one of the scariest Twilight Zones of all time, It's a Good Life, with Billy Mooney,
which is based on one of his own original short stories.
Yep, that is it. Yep.
Yeah, which has been entered into the Science Fiction Hall of Fame. Oh, I love Day of the Dove. Here we are sidetracking again. I love Day of the Dove and I love Cahn. He's my favorite Klingon, period, hands down, no question. Michael Ansara was amazing in that role.
Yep. Even at the end, out, we need no reason to hate Earthlings or whatever.
But if he did Mirror Mirror, that means the guy who wrote this movie is responsible for all the Mirror Universe episodes in the end from Star Trek, which we've gotten a lot of play out of over the years through.
Yep, and of course, is Michelle Yeoh, isn't she the Empress in the new series? Did she come from the Mirror Universe?
She did. Yeah. So we have that. We have all those wonderful Deep Space Nine episodes in the Mirror Universe. It's really good stuff. I think Star Trek Prodigy gave us the Voyager version of the Mirror Universe briefly. So, and here we are talking Star Trek again. How is this happening?
You never, because you had some really talented people involved with this, and they really shone in a lot of these films. I'm trying to think of other things. If you've seen, and of course, he like we said, he wrote The Terror from Beyond Space, which has many elements from Alien that turned up in Alien.
I have talked about that one here on the show many moons ago with Scott Morris. That's one that I've got on my list to show Beth. I've been kind of picking and choosing which movies I want to show Beth because not everybody loves the movies the way that I do, and I get it. But I have shown her Manos, The Hands of Fate, so I probably can get away with showing her anything at this point. I have thought about The Terror from Beyond Space because it does have some really classic sci-fi trope origins in it. Alien for sure.
No, it's surprising. Just like I said, this one was very different. It's a kind of attempt to well, we mentioned the Mummy movies to bring them back to life with, a touch of radiation and, an exotic setting like we had. No, they tried something really different with this one. I think it's very effective. And one thing I don't know is I have never seen a British poster for this film. I really wonder how widespread. I'm sure it got everything played over there, just like here mostly, but I wonder if this got all around the world. I've only seen American posters for this one.
It was released in the UK in 1958, the same year. But I don't have a lot of information about what happened when it was released over there. I would imagine it got a poster, but I'd be curious to see the one sheet. The reason Alan keeps bringing up posters, he collects one sheets and such. In fact, one of the first times that I met him in person, was he was doing a presentation at the Lovecraft Film Festival of movie posters that were based or that came from properties inspired by Lovecraft and the Lovecraftian mythos and those types of stories. And he gave a really cool kind of PowerPoint picture show of all these posters. And it's kind of heartening to know that you haven't let the collection bug die. You're still collecting and thinking about these posters.
It's died out a little bit, but as I approach a fixed income, it's becoming much tougher. And prices have escalated on these things so much. It's rude. Yeah, it's almost prohibitive at times, but there's still stuff out there. So where would you rank this? Where would you, if we had our druthers, is this movie better than The Brain from Planet Eros?
Oh, that one's hard because Brain from Planet Eros is John Agar. I mean...
Yeah. Oh, yes.
John Agar.
I must not mock the patron saint.
I know.
I must not mock the patron saint. Yeah, you're right. It does have that going for it. Yeah. All right. Is it better than The Beast of Yucca Flats, would you say?
I would say yes. Okay, hands down. That's no question for me. No question.
Is it better than The Giant Claw? Nah. Giant Claw's too ridiculous and funny.
Giant Claw's a lot of fun. Giant Claw's a whole lot of fun.
Yeah.
But I think I would show this one to Beth before I showed her The Giant Claw.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I would say that this one doesn't get enough praise, and by today's standards, it is kind of a little slow here and there. But like you said, it's fat. It's not a long movie, and it's got quite a bit of dialogue. I think the characters are pretty believable in it, a lot more than just cartoon cutouts and things.
I like the characters, actually. I know I keep saying it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not very long. But if they had extended it and given us more stuff with those characters instead of stretching other things out, I think I would have been okay with that. Because I think the love triangles could have been more fun to explore. Instead of just giving him like one scene.
Yep. I think it has a candidate for another one of the creepiest paintings in horror films, because it's got this picture of, and he's faceless in the painting because his head is tilted up, and he's this big bucolic guy, and his arms are tied up as a slave and things like that. But it is pretty. I'd say it's on a par with the creepiness in the lady's portrait in The Screaming Skull, if you've seen that.
Ooh, of course. If I've seen The Screaming Skull. Alan, who do you think you're talking to?
I thought, oh, that lady's creepy. Plus, you got the skull screaming. But of course, with The Screaming Skull, when I first saw that and living in Cleveland, Ohio, I was lucky enough to watch that on the Ghoulardi show. And every time the skull showed up, it was supposed to be this orgasmic moment of horror when the skull shows up, and then Ghoulardi, the horror host, would stick in papa 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 huma mau mau papa huma mau.
Oh man, The Screaming Skull is one that I've shown Beth, and she and I both really like it and would love to do something with it someday. We have some ideas, some thoughts about some things we want to do with that movie. So stay tuned. Maybe something will happen maybe next year.
Cool. But I would say it's one that kind of has flown under the radar. There are some really good little feature films that I think still have some shocks. I think of, like, we're talking about mummy movies. I think that Pharaoh's Curse is a movie that doesn't get enough attention. It's got some creepy stuff in it.
That's
from
another
that
one that
time.
I went after when I was on my mummy kick. It's like, okay, I've seen all the Universal, I've seen all the Hammers. Now what do I do? Curse of the Faceless Man, Pharaoh's Curse. That one's from 1957.
Mhm.
I like that one too. I don't think it gets enough attention. I think you give me a mummy movie, I'm going to be happy. I mean, it's hard to find a bad mummy movie for me.
Oh, well, what do you think of Curse of the Bigfoot?
Curse of Bigfoot, I believe, was that the one that basically added wraparound segments to Teenagers versus the Thing? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
But it does have a mummy.
Yes, it does technically have a mummy. And Jackie Ray Neiman Jones from Monos and Hands of Fate is in the wraparound segments.
Yes.
I had a little bit of fun with her when I had her on the show years ago, talking with her about stuff regarding that one. What do I think of it? Actually, it was introduced to me by an old associate that we shared. An indie filmmaker introduced that to me. And I like it.
I like it too. That one showed on one of the local stations here. It was one of their creature features, and again, I think you just kind of get entranced almost with the antique look of it and the kind of almost Disney-like attitude of the students going to dig up the thing, and it's kind of a goofy looking monster, but it just shove itself in your face several times and people do get killed, and it has a kind of spectacular death scene.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's another fun one. And this is what I love about having people who love this stuff on the show is, hey, we're going to talk about this movie. And then half an hour later, we're talking Star Trek, who knows what else. And now we're talking about the Curse of Bigfoot of all movies.
Curse of Bigfoot.
Oh, man. But you know what? It's a fun movie. And I love these films. I will find something to enjoy about these movies one way or the other. It's my, I have a drive to do so, whether the movie deserves it or not. I'm going to give it its due. And I find it enjoyable. I think our old friend Kenny from Old Mexico is the one who told me there's no such thing as a bad movie. If it doesn't bore you, it's not bad. And I'm never bored by any of these things.
I agree. Lots of things to enjoy about them.
Before we wrap up, Alan, is there anything else about A Curse of the Faceless Man you want to make sure we throw in there for listeners who may not be as excited to check it out as we were?
Kind of the reason that we got together to talking about it is there are other people who know and like it. Just on Facebook, I saw somebody else mention it as one of their top 5 lost treasures of things. And the reason that we started talking about it was I posted a picture. Somebody made a model kit of it.
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's amazing to me what people make, and it's a good looking model of it. And, people are making models of Tabonga from Hell It Came, and people are making models of the cat lady from Terror from the Year 5000. So it's not, it's a little more obscure, but it's well worth seeking out and enjoying. And like I said, you've got the Gerald Fried soundtrack. You've got some quality actors in it from both B movies and, Oscar Goldman from the $6 Million Man is the hero. So check it out. You'll enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, well, it's an hour.
Put that on the movie poster. That's what's on the British one sheet. If you don't enjoy it, it's only an hour. So
it's only an hour.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Bride of Monster Kid Radio. I said it at the top of the show. I'm going to say it again now. This show isn't a thing without you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and sharing the post and retweeting tweets and Xing things all over the place and just making sure that this gets into the ear holes of as many monster kids as possible, because the more, the merrier, right? We want to see this tribe grow, and the more people we have as part of the community, the better it is for everybody, because there are events happening all over the world, all over the country, all over the place for monster kids, and we can talk about it in our online spaces, like our various social media outlets over at Facebook. We have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. We're on Blue Sky, we're on X, we're on Reddit, we're on Patreon, we're on Discord, we're all over the place. So we would love to have you join us online and help spread the word and just see how this community can grow even more than it has over the past, man, it's been almost 13 years at this point, which is kind of a cool number when it comes to monster movie stuff. But anyway, we just really appreciate all of your support that you've given us. I mentioned Patreon a couple of times, patreon.com/monsterkidradio. You know you can follow us over there for free. Now, if you become a patron, you get other stuff and you help support the show financially, but please consider following us for free over at Patreon, because this is where we're going to start focusing a lot of our online efforts to try to get away from the meta kind of thing and to stop being a slave to whoever owns X these days. Yes, I know who owns X. I just don't want to get into it. And I just really want to kind of focus a lot of our online presence there on Patreon. So please consider following us over there. And then you can become a patron and help us out a little bit more. But you can follow for free. Also over there is the link to the poll that I talked about at the top of the show, where you're going to help us decide Bride of Monster Kid Radio's best classic Universal monster movies. I'm going to give you the link right now, though, too, and it's in the show notes at monsterkidradio.net. Go to tinyurl.com/TOPTENUNI. That's tinyurl.com/top10UNI. And just pick your top 10 favorite, or what you consider the best classic Universal monster movies. And on next week's episode, we're going to go over that. And we're going to decide definitively, thanks to you, what the best of classic Universal monster movies are. And hey, depending on how this works out, maybe we'll do something for Hammer Films down the line. Maybe we'll do something for the Toho Kaiju films. Yeah, that might be kind of fun. But let's make this one a success first. And I can only do that with your help. I mentioned the website, monsterkidradio.net. This is where you're going to find links to everything that we talked about, plus our contact information, where you can email us at monsterkidradio@gmail.com, or you can call us and leave us a voicemail at 360-524-2484. Bride of Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Bride of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death, our other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, the Team Death YouTube channel, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. All previous episodes of this podcast, as well as the original Monster Kid Radio podcast, are available at www.monsterkidradio.net. Please rate and review Bride of Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Rock Pose is copyright 2024. The Ghosttones, it's off their album Work, 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 and you can find it over at The Ghosttones, and then the number 1.bandcamp.com. That's theghosttones1.bandcamp.com. Check them out and let them know that you heard about them here on Bride of Monster Kid Radio. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week when we go over the results of the poll where you help us decide the best of the Universal Classic Monster movies. Ciao.